Hi, everyone. Good morning or afternoon, evening, wherever you'd be watching us from. Hello, welcome. I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes just to make sure everything is in order. Apologies for any delays. Okay. While we're giving it a second. So welcome to another series of the Sea Turtle Rescue Alliance medical series. For those of you who don't know what Sea Turtle Rescue Alliance is about, basically our mission is to connect and empower the sea turtle and rescue and rehabilitation community with the latest tools to improve the care and welfare of these injured sea turtles around the world. So basically we aim to forge a network of sea turtle rescue centers to share clinical knowledge and share data to enhance these medical practices at different facilities around the world. And obviously supporting global conservation of sea turtles. So, because we all know that they're endangered species. So this medical series brings every month, ideally, a relevant topic to sea turtle medicine. And although today's might be at a first glance more related towards husbandry, the truth is that water that our patients live in can impact greatly their health status. And it's one of Maria's passions. And that's why we brought her in today to discuss life support systems and water quality, which we're very happy to have you, Maria. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mariana. I'm one of the veterinarians with Sea Turtle Rescue Alliance, so I'm usually behind the emails that you guys receive. Bear with me when I'm a bit slow replying to them, because I also have another full-time job at the same time. We already have some people joining in. Hey, hello. If you do have any questions throughout the talk, make sure to ask them in the comment section on Facebook. I'll make sure to check them out as the presentation is happening. If it is pertinent to interrupt Maria throughout, I'll do that. Otherwise, I think we'll just ask them all at the end of the talk. If you are watching this at a later stage, when we have this recording, you can still ask questions, either write them on the comment section on Facebook, and I'll, every now and then we'll make sure that we go there and pop in, see if they have been answered, or if Maria has had the time to answer them. Otherwise, you can send us an email. Our email is STRA, so the Sea Turtle Rescue Alliance initials, so STRA@seaturtlerescuealliance.org. So you can always send us an email, and we'll make sure that Maria will get back to you at some point. Or maybe she'll share her own email and you can talk to her directly. So let me talk to you a bit about Maria. So she received her bachelor's in marine science from Jacksonville University in Florida in 2018. But actually, she grew up in a small coastal town in South Carolina in the USA. And her love for sea turtles was intensified after having done a rehab internship at the Karen Beasley Sea Turtle Rescue and Rehabilitation Center, who hopefully will be watching us today and rooting for her. That center is actually in North Carolina. And her career began initially as an aquarist and aquatics keeper of stingrays and fish at Jacksonville Zoo and Gardens. And then she followed sea turtles down to Sea Turtle Inc. in South Padre Island in Texas, where we both are at the minute. Not in South Padre, but in Texas, where she became a life support systems manager and aquarist for the past 2 years. Currently, Maria is actually a life support systems filtration installer at Longhorn Organics. So she's left sea turtles for a little bit. And it has been, throughout her career and passion for sea turtles that she's gained this passion for life support and the water quality. And as we said, the importance that it can play on sea turtles' health. So a very important topic today. It is also intense in terms if people are not aware of how it works, but that's the beauty of it. So I'm actually quite happy I'm going to be learning today as well. And I guess, we've been 5 minutes in. Maria, do you want to take the stage and start your presentation?
Yeah,
Thank
totally.
you.
Go ahead. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. I'll go ahead. Hi guys, I'm so excited to be here and thank you so much for that introduction. I really appreciate it and I feel very honored to be here and talking to you guys on some topics that are one of my favorite things to talk about. Like Mariana said, sea turtles were my absolute passion. I don't think that will ever go away. But through my passion for sea turtles, definitely the love of water quality and sea turtle life support systems and life support systems in general have grown through that tremendously. And it even surprised me and caught me off guard how much that I enjoy them and love teaching others about them as well. I do want to touch a little bit about where I got my background in water quality just for a minute before we head on. It was at the Jacksonville Zoo and Gardens through my senior keepers, and I appreciate them very much for teaching me and taking me under their wing. Doing water quality for the entire zoo was something I never thought was even going to be a thing. That was really, really wild. What I think I loved the most out of all of that, though, was being able to actually see a physical reaction through the chemicals to see, whether the water quality was actually good or not, and not just number based. Numbers say a lot, and they're going to give you the answers to a lot of things that are going on in your system, but also just like seeing the color differences and everything. I don't know. It really made me very interested in it to see how your water is truly reacting in your system. Okay, so going on from that, we'll go ahead and start our presentation. So just to do a little overview of what I'll be talking about, I'll touch a little bit on how we follow federal permitting in the United States. I know it may be a little bit different internationally. And at the end, if anybody can touch on that, I would love to learn about that. So just to touch about that, and then what are life support systems in general, and kind of the breakdowns of some filtration. Water quality and their parameters. What are some of the things that we look at in a sea turtle facility in the United States? Data collection and record keeping and why it's very, very important. And we'll look at a little bit of resident sea turtle tanks at Sea Turtle Link Center and how there are differences in water quality in those tanks versus the patient tanks. Some helpful tips and tricks in the trade of LSS and water quality that I would like to share with you guys. And then just a little bit about construction and design process. I know that a lot of facilities are always trying to grow in some capacity, especially in just making things a lot better and healthier environments for our sea turtles. So yeah. Okay, so following permitting guidelines, sea turtle hospitals and rehab centers are obviously held to certain and particular standards for all areas of conservation for our sea turtles that we take care of. A lot of it is broken down into different categories or departments. So like conservation has its own aspect, rehabilitation, and even under rehab, there are lots of things that go along with LSS. So all of the tank sizes, the quantities, and then all of the parameters for water quality that need to be followed in order to give some kind of good environment for these animals to live in. So in the United States, we follow under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife permits. And then each state thereafter has its own guidelines that it can add upon as well. So they may have some more stricter guidelines that are just within those permitting. And it may also just have to do with where you're located along the coastline too. So there are just a few differences when it comes to that statewide. And then, so when you're creating a new facility or updating a current one, those guidelines need to be still taken into account, of course. So some of the things that might come up are tank sizes and the quantities of tanks. So some questions to go along to think about those types of things are, is there adequate space available for the size ranges of turtles that come in? Do we have enough tanks that we can house multiple juvenile turtles in? Do we have enough tanks that, a subadult turtle can live in with enough space to adequately swim and dive down, those types of things. Another great thing to look at is how many patients come into your facility on a yearly basis. And that can be a really great starting point to figure out how many tanks that you might need or how many tanks you might need extra of just because you're starting to see more come into your facility as time goes on. Then water quality parameter ranges, how can these be met or will there need to be changes made in order to meet them? Are you seeing more turtles come into your facility? Do you have not that many tanks? Okay, this may affect your water quality. How can we, go forward fixing that? So just some things to think about. Okay, so what are life support systems? And what we call in our world LSS systems, all the like. So LSS is simply the filtration for all of your tanks that your patients or resident sea turtles, ones that cannot be released, are going to live in. So these systems are comprised of the tank themselves, just like with the isolation tank you'll see over here on the left. All of the filtration that goes with that. So plumbing, pumps, heater, chillers, specialized equipment, and other things we could go down a rabbit hole talking about, that allows life to thrive in tanks and exhibits in zoos, aquariums, and specifically for us, sea turtle rehab centers. So they do have a wide range. Anything that falls under LSS, even a tank, is considered part of the filtration system. So it ranges from a dump and fill tank or an isolation tank that you see there on the left, all the way up to very complex systems. So there on the left is just a tank with some salt water in it and, a little drop-in heater. So even though that looks like absolutely nothing, it still is very important to that sea turtle's health, and they might not be in that tank forever. But if they are, we need to make sure that we're giving the best care to that turtle. And how can we do that? And then at Karen Beasley Center, this is just a quick little screenshot there of how, just going from an isolation tank to then at Turtle Bay for them is what they call it, to have some of their tanks, and you can see all of the piping that goes into the trenching here that will lead back to this back room, which is their LSS room, which is filled with all their filtration. And then there, lastly on the right, is at ABQ Biopark Aquarium in New Mexico. I went this past March, and this is just a very quick screenshot of their 2-story level LSS room just for a few of their tanks. So the rest of the building is filled with more LSS. Honestly, that takes up a good portion of an aquarium. So even aquariums and rehab centers, a lot of times when you're thinking about those things, you're thinking about the animal, which is perfectly fine, because I would be lying if I said otherwise. That's exactly what I would think. When I was younger, I never thought about anything else. And it wasn't until my internship that I started thinking more about the care of the water and all the things that go along with it, and how important that truly is. Okay, so don't make fun of me, but this is my little mock-up of what a basic little system would be for housing sea turtles. This is just very basic filtration. You can add more things on if necessary, but in my experience, this is what works pretty well for housing a sea turtle patient. So of course you have your sea turtle tank. You will need a pump that will draw in water from the tank into your sand filter here. This is going to get all of the particulates out of the water and clear up any waste that's in there, and also help with your water quality and clarity. It then can pass through a chlorinator, which can help kill off bacteria, and then go to a heater chiller. Now this, of course, will depend on the time of year that it is, whether you're going to be cooling the water down or heating it up, and then it will return back to the system and go in a full circle, circulating for over 24 hours, 24/7. So if you need to, you can potentially add more if mechanical filtration is not good enough to aid in your water quality or clarity. So for example, you can add an RK2 protein skimmer to it, one of my favorite pieces of equipment. You'll need a pump to go with it. So the pump will pull in the water from the tank into your filtration unit. There's another pump associated with it. Once it does its thing, it will send water back in, and ultimately it would help clear up the water clarity. It does a lot more things, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then over on the left is a saltwater holding tank. This is simply just somewhere to house the water either that you make or that you source. And that way you can get fresh salt water to your sea turtle tank whenever you need to do changes or add more water to their tank. Okay, so now we'll talk about the 3 types of filtrations that exist. So filtration, one, is a very important component of maintaining water quality in the tanks and the exhibits. So we have mechanical, biological, and chemical. And the reason that they're in this order is also because of the order that they go in an actual LS system. So mechanical filtration is the first and foremost. It actually removes the most particulate matter from the tank water. And the sizes that it filters is actually dependent upon the material or media that's in that filter. So most sand filters are filled with sand. That makes the most sense, I think. But the grain size will vary. And knowing when to change that out is also very important because it is being ground down over time based on all of the material that it's pulling through to filter that water correctly and get out all of the waste from the turtles. So an example of that is a sand filter, a drum filter, and bead filters, screens, sieves, and even stock filters too. Biological filtration is next, and this allows for more surface area for good bacteria to grow on and aids the removal of toxic ammonia and nitrites in the system. This is super important, especially for fish. So any aquarium or any tank that is housing some type of fish, this is something you really need in order for them to thrive, since they actually breathe in the water and we want them to be healthy as well. So examples for that are trickle towers, fluidized beds, bioreactors, and pressure sand filters. And lastly are the chemical filtrations. So this will remove any organic compound through a chemical process. So whether you are treating your water beforehand, before it is entering your system, or while it is in the system itself, it can still be going on. So a lot of times there's an ion exchange that's happening, or ions are being pulled out of the water through those types of filtrations. And then there's different types of chemical reactions happening either through absorption or adsorption. And examples of this are protein skimmers, carbon filters, UV sterilizers, and ozone systems. Okay, so the 3 types of filtration that we most commonly see in sea turtle hospitals are sand filters for mechanical filtration, and then also sock filters, but these are usually used on lower volume systems, so not as much gallon size to the tanks. However, this is where things get a little tricky. Sand filters can both be mechanical and biological filters, so they can have dual purpose, and we'll talk on that a little bit later when we talk about the resident tanks at Sea Turtle Inc. And then biological, some facilities will have fluidized beds. These are pretty cool. So all of these, where's my mouse? Here we go. The equipment here is filled with these little bio balls, and these can be surface area for that good bacteria to live on. But at the same time, it can also help with raising your alkalinity, your buffering system for your pH levels. But like I said before, mainly these are used for tanks that house fish in them. And then for chemical, we have protein skimmers. RK2 systems are honestly one of the best out there, and just a gentle plug for them. And then UV sterilizers and ozone. Protein skimmers can also be chemical and a mechanical source of filtration. They've all got a lot going on. All right, so for disinfection and sterilization, this is really talking about treating your water before it is entering your system. That is really important to make sure that all of the water quality parameters meet the standards or proper care for the sea turtles that we need them to live in. Either it's for a short period of time or a long period of time. Either way, we need to make sure that that water is good and clean. So some systems can use ozone, and this can be injected through a protein skimmer, and that does increase the efficiency of those skimmers, and a lot more protein can be pulled out of the water. Also, UV sterilizers can be used. That's what we'll see in this right-hand corner. Those guys are actually pretty cool. They have UV bulbs that are in them, and they work anywhere from 200 to 280 nanometers, and that's really just the light that is passed through those bulbs. So any of the water that is flowing through that particular UV sterilizer, it's actually breaking down the pathogens DNA and killing off any of that pathogen that's running through that system, or even bacteria. However, it's not going to get rid of everything in your system. That's why you really need to look at your source water before it gets in. And sometimes source water can be, artificially made or pulled from a source nearby. But either way, you can use a UV sterilizer on the water that is initially coming in, as well as in your tank system. And then lastly, chlorination. Chlorination can be used for cleaning up source water, but also on your tank as well for cleaning up algae and killing off other bacteria that might live in there. And we obviously don't want bacteria in our systems, especially with injured patients. Okay, so pumps are super integral to the LSS. They are basically the heart of the system. Without a pump, you are not going to do anything. These guys are very expensive in terms of, some life support equipment. They can be a little bit cheaper, but unfortunately, they go through a lot of hard times. They get used 24/7. They never stop unless you tell them to, or they die. So you need a lot of maintenance and care on these guys to keep them in order, to keep running, because we really need them to run for our facilities, right? So there are single speed pumps and variable speed pumps. There are some others out there, but these are the two main kind that you will see. So the single speed on the left there is a set speed based on horsepower. So once it is on, it is going to run at that set speed forever. And then a variable speed pump, which happened to be my favorite, they have quite a wide range of RPMs, so you can set it and keep that range for whatever tank that you need. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. Okay, so how do sand filters and protein skimmers work? Love this question. Let's talk about it. So here you have a pressurized sand filter that is attached to your tank. You're pulling in your water from your tank to your pump, which is leading it to your sand filter. So like I said before, your sand filter is not going to do anything without that pump. The pump is telling exactly where that water needs to go. If you have a multi-port, some facilities have multi-ports, which say whether it's going to filter, you're backwashing the system, or if you're keeping it closed, that means that your system is offline. But some systems have ball valves, and you'll have to change and adjust those ball valves to open the flow to allow water to go into your sand filter or whatever thing that you are maintaining. So you are allowing flow into your sand filter here. It's going to come up. Your water is going to go down into your media where it's actually getting polished and all of the waste is getting trapped. And then it will go down into these laterals down here. There's usually about 12 of those all the way around. It's getting pulled back in. It's nice and clean now, or at least that's the goal. And it's going back into your system, into your tank. So these guys are under pressure, and under the pressure will be determined on your set speed for your pump. Then protein skimmers, these guys are incredible. So if you have a really messy turtle, which they're all pretty messy, but if we're being honest, I think loggerheads are the messiest turtle. They just produce a lot of waste. And if you house a really large loggerhead, they're going to produce even more. So in order to get more protein and waste from that tank and get that tank looking really clean and clear, you're going to need one of these guys. So you're going to pull in your water from your tank into one of the pumps here. It's going to then fill your chamber for your RK2 protein skimmer, or fractionator, sometimes called. And another pump, which is hidden in the back here, is actually pulling in air, which then gets infused with the water inside. And then it's going through a chemical filtration called, or a chemical process called adsorption. So all of that nasty material or waste is going to be brought up into bubbles. And the bubble size is also super important, but I'll leave that for another time. All of the bubbles are actually going to have the waste on the outside of the bubble, and that is called adsorption. So the bubble is lifting them up and out of your system. So if you can imagine, this is only a day after completely doing a water change, whether it's 10 or 20% on a system. This is how much it's pulling basically on a day-to-day basis. And everyone that's still at the facility knows which which RK2 system we're talking about here. This is Poppy's. She's quite a messy turtle. So it's pulling out the waste from not just the turtle. There's also fish in that tank. So any of the waste that they're producing, and then also the food that she's eating as well. So there's lots of sources of waste, and we just want to get them out. That way it's in a better environment for them. Okay, so heaters and chillers are next, and heat exchange and supplemental heat. So this is also another arguably very important component of LSS for sea turtle tanks. So obviously we know that sea turtles are ectothermic, so they're obviously relying on some external heat source to keep them in their body temperature. So we have the required specific range of temperatures that they need to be living in, and we can set it accordingly depending on the time and season of the year. So if it is a warmer month, we can have it cooling the water to make sure it's within range and that the turtles are comfortable. And then, same in the wintertime. Speaking about Poppy again, she is a very picky little lady. So when we went to change over for the summertime, for example, we started cooling down our systems. And this is a very gradual process. We don't want anyone to get shocked, the fish included. So it's gradual, maybe bump it down 1 degree Fahrenheit per day. Sometimes we can go slower too, if need be. But we bumped it down a few degrees over a span of maybe 2 weeks, and she stopped eating. At first, we didn't think anything about LSS side. We thought maybe something behavioral was going on. Hopefully nothing medical was going on, right? So we were able to exclude all of these things. Then we look back at what changed with the system. Let's look at that. Okay, water quality looks good. Everything is still within range. What was the only thing that we changed? It was the temperature. So we bumped it back up. This girl came from Florida, so maybe she's just a little bit more needy in terms of wanting warmer water, and who can blame her? So we bumped it back up, and sure enough, that was it. So while other turtle tanks can stay at cooler temperatures, hers stays at a little bit warmer. Just keep in mind though, in the wintertime, these heater chillers are working all the time, but they work even harder to heat in the winter. So anything below 45 degrees Fahrenheit, they're going to stop being able to pull heat from the air and actually not be able to work and function as well as they should be. And that's okay. That's just the way that they work, just like an AC system for your house. That's why supplemental heating is very necessary. So either using a propane heater or a boiler system, that's going to help in the wintertime. Okay, so at Sea Turtle Inc., all of our sea turtle patient tanks were isolated systems for LSS. And I know that some other hospitals are fully connected to all their tanks, or all the tanks are connected to one LSS system, I should say. And there are pros and cons to both. But for Sea Turtle Inc. specifically, each tank has its own filtration. And while you can't see the filters necessarily, they are behind the tanks or a little off to the side. So the reason that they have their own separate LSS equipment is actually a good thing. It helps reduce bacteria being spread, also parasites. So if any sea turtle patient comes in with cariospora, we can actually isolate them, especially if they haven't gotten all of the parasites out before moving from an isolation tank into a main tank. We can then basically quarantine them. If there's other patients that also have that same parasite, they can also go into that tank too and not have it affect any of the rest of the tanks, which is really important. Another important fact is between fibropapillomatosis, which we all know, FP and non-FP patients. So we do not want this to continue to spread. It's obviously not a very good thing. And any care with that, we want to be very careful with. So having those systems separate from each other is super important. And then some facilities also separate different species. So that's another good way to do that too. The video again. Okay. Okay, so at Sea Turtle Inc., we actually vacuumed the tanks. The most common way I've seen to clean sea turtle tanks through my experience and visiting other facilities have been with a net, scooping things out, and brushes for scrubbing. And while that works really well, I found that I really preferred vacuuming tanks. I think it did a lot of good things. And I'll play this video too while I speak. Here we go. So the vacuuming system is set up with a single speed pump, which is connected to a waistline and a hose to the vacuum head and pole, which then goes into your tank. So essentially you're creating a vacuum, right? You're able to pull out whatever is on the bottom of that tank and remove it. So your filter is doing so much that it can, or your sand filter, it's trying to pull out as much gunk out of the water, as much waste out of the water, but sometimes that's just not good enough. We need to get things off the bottom of the tanks. So this is super effective at removing uneaten food, feces, debris from outdoors, if your facility is outside, or just litter in general. Smaller particles that a net maybe won't be able to scoop up, and algae. And one of my favorite things though, while vacuuming, was seeing the personalities of these sea turtles really come through. So anytime that I would put this vacuum into Jordan, one of our loggerhead sea turtles tank, she would always come up immediately to it and be like, "What are you doing in my tank? What is this?" And it happened every single day for months, but every single time she would go right up to it. Kemp's Ridleys, the little juveniles, they would immediately try to attack it. They were like, "What's in my tank? I don't understand." And then sometimes the green sea turtles are like, "All right, cool, you can do that." So it's also interesting, but from a medical standpoint, it's very good for keeping very clean tanks, and also a good way to do some observations of those sea turtles too. While you're doing this, you also are creating a 5 to 10% water change on the tanks every day, and this really reduces the coliform bacteria levels, which is incredibly important when housing sea turtles. Okay, and then lastly for LSS, we're going to talk about isolation tanks and tanks with filtration. So ISO tanks are obviously ones that do not have any filtration associated with them. It's just a tank with some water in it. And if you need to, you might put in a drop-in heater just to heat up the temperature of the water in case wherever it is not warm enough. This is super important for initial intake of patients and is very ideal for a short period of time. We don't really want to keep them in just shallow water for an extended period of time. We obviously need them to dive down, eat their food, swim around, have a lot more room to be able to just be in, even if they are in rehab for a few months. That's just very important. This is also a very good way to observe how they do in small amounts of water, especially if they're a very extremely lethargic turtle coming in. A downside though, some may say, is that you need to do a water change on it at least once a day just to give good water quality and care to that turtle. And that can take up a lot of time, especially if you have a very messy turtle too. You may be doing a couple of water changes a day. I know from personal experience having loggerheads, as soon as you do a water change on an isolation tank, they might completely ruin it the moment you start putting water back in, and you're just going to have to do another one. It is what it is. And I know all of you that have gone through that, you know what I'm talking about. Obviously keeping the water quality is as clean as possible is just like very important for this such a small system. And then the injuries are also important too. There might be things that are sloughing off here, or even when you're just giving a freshwater bath, maybe the first day or so, you're getting all that epibiota off, which is great because then it's not going into a filtered tank either. And then also when you're giving treatments, there might be some kind of medication that's on them, and you're going to see it immediately at the surface of the water because there is no filtration here. Now on to filtered tanks. These are tanks with constant circulation from your equipment. And these are very important for the patients to provide a natural flowing current to them. And these are very ideal for longer periods of time for staying in rehab. Patients would typically do better eating in these tanks versus isolation at least Sea Turtle Inc. And that was noticed by our past Director of Animal Care, Nina Navi. Some patients that had been there for a few days or a few weeks that might have been in isolation were doing really well, showing great signs of recovery. But the last thing that they weren't doing was eating, and that is obviously very important. So as soon as we put them into an isolation tank, a filtered tank, a larger one, and especially if they're housed with other size comparable turtles, they might see them going after food and see that as competition, and that gets them going right away. So that is pretty neat. A downside to this is, what if a turtle needs like more care per se? So what if they need to have less of a current, or it's slowed down? That's where those variable speed pumps for your systems are really important. That way you can adjust the flow rate. Okay, so moving on to water quality. This refers to the chemical, biological, and physical characteristics of the water that you're referring to. So our tank water or our source water. The most common parameters that we test for in sea turtle hospitals are temperature, salinity, pH, chlorine levels, or bromine if you're using ozone, and coliform bacteria levels. So keeping water quality parameters within permit ranges are important. Under FWC permits in the United States, these are our ranges. We have to make sure that these are met here in the US. We have lots of different types of equipment that can help us get those measurements. Now, the ones that are shown on the right are very cheap, I will say. They don't cost a lot of money, which is great, especially for organizations that have a little bit of a tighter budget, but also, ones that are starting out too. Even really well-known facilities still use handheld thermometers. You can have a very fancy thermometer or other type of meter that can test for temperature. And if that breaks, what are you going to do? You're going to grab for a handheld thermometer. All of these give accurate readings, your chlorine, pH levels, refractometer here on the right, and your temperature. But because they may be on the cheaper end, you still have to make sure that things are being adjusted accordingly, making sure that things aren't broken, making sure your reagents that you're putting in are still shelf stable. And then also things that are in calibration. So just keep an eye out on that. If your parameters are not within range, they need to be adjusted accordingly and meet those to keep the animal safe and healthy. So if your salinity levels are out of range, or they're too high, you're going to need to add more fresh water to lower those salinity levels down. If your pH is out of range, or it is on the lower side and you want to buffer it up, you're going to need to add sodium bicarb or sodium bicarbonate. And a lot of those things all have calculations to them. And we can talk about that later after the presentation if anyone wants more information on that. Okay, so let's talk about seawater. This is super important for every facility, right? We're either going to be making artificial seawater, which is great, or you're going to be able to source seawater from an area that you are close to. So for Sea Turtle Inc., we were very fortunate to have the Laguna Madre behind our facility, and then a lagoon system that came right onto the property. So we were able to source the water directly from that lagoon. Now, there are pros and cons to both of these. A pro for sourcing water is that, hey, this is a free water source. We don't have to have it being trucked in from the ocean, however miles away that is for landlocked states. If they do that, that becomes very expensive as well. So this is a free water source. It's also readily available at all times. So at 12 p.m. at night, if I wanted to go in, or 12 a.m. at night, that's right, 12 a.m., I could go in and make water anytime. So that's awesome. However, there are cons to that. There could be bacteria and pathogens that could be present. Of course, we can treat that with sterilization. And that too can become quite expensive depending on how much you're pulling in at a time, or within, just the history of the hospital. So there are different ways you can combat that. And either using chlorine or some other type of sterilization, you can work the numbers on that to best fit your facility. Salinity levels are dependent on that source. So whatever that may be, for example, at Sea Turtle Inc., this was a hypersalinated lagoon, meaning the salinity is very high. So you're going to have to combat that with fresh water to make sure that those levels are now within range. Then going on to artificial seawater, you can use things like Instant Ocean. I swear by that. That brand is amazing. There are also other really good brands out there as well. They not only contain salt, we're not just pouring normal table salt into our water and mixing it around, right? We are putting Instant Ocean in. It has all of the chemical balances that you need right away. It also has all of the minerals that you would normally need in your ocean water to put into those tanks too. So something that's really good using this is right away that there are no bacteria or pathogens present in that. You can control the salinity level very easily. Once you do your calculations, you can know, hey, I actually only need 2 boxes of salt to make however much water, and that'll be good for the rest of the week. Great. Now you can make salt water anywhere. You don't have to live by the ocean in order to make salt water, and that's great. Con to that, though, is that it can become very expensive. Salt is expensive. And then there is the waste from the salt plastic bags that comes in, and then the worry of ordering and making sure that things are in stock to make sure that it's available. Okay, so then we're going to talk about data collection and record keeping, one of my favorite things, honestly. It's quite fun. Keeping records of all the data collected in both LSS and water quality are very important, just as keeping medical records are for turtles as well. So I would suggest always keeping a physical copy of whatever you're recording, and then also an electronic copy, because God forbid something ever happened to that physical copy, it became wet or destroyed somehow, you will always have that backup copy. It's also really good when you don't want to spend a lot of time searching for something. If you know, hey, I changed the pH recently in one of my patient tanks. I don't remember exactly how much sodium bicarb I used to buffer up my system. Why don't I look at my electronic copies? I can easily type that in, goes right to there. And then I can say, hey, okay, I put 200 grams of sodium bicarb in. Great, that's going to be my starting point. Let's see if that works. Another example could be looking up when we started to change, heater chiller temperatures in the winter time from last year versus this year, kind of comparing that, seeing what worked, what didn't work, and what's going to work for you this year. So those are also very important. And then anytime federal agents can come in as well and look at these. So that's also pretty important to have on hand. Okay, and then SOPs, these are our standard operating procedures. These are very important. I feel like I'm saying that about everything, but they truly are. One of the things that I learned working in my first job was having these available at all times, because you never know when your superior or your equal is going to fall ill, or if an upper management individual is going to be able to help you or not with a certain situation. So while this is a physical copy or an electronic copy, either way, it's going to have a step-by-step process of how to complete a task. This is really handy. And we all forget, we all have mistakes too. So anytime that you forget something or a step, you can go back and look, okay, this is exactly how we do this when we backwash a sand filter. This is what we do and why we do this when we change out media from a sand filter. One of my first things that I wanted to do when I started as the LSS manager at CTurtleLink was create these SOPs. None of them existed, and I created all the living ones. And this is me basically crying over the ones like my little babies over there. They really were, though. They were poured out my heart and soul. I was like, I want everyone to come in and be able to pull this out and go, okay, this is exactly how you do this. So very important. Okay, next we'll talk about the residency turtle tanks. So at CTurtleLink, there are 5 residency turtles, and they all have their own individual tanks and LSS systems. So they range from 18,000 to 56,000 gallons, and each one of them house different types of native and local fish to provide a more natural environment to them. This also helps with any kind of enrichment too. There's also different types of enrichment like PVC or actual coral inserts and things that you can put into resident turtle tanks to give them that more natural existence. Since they can't go back home to the wild, kind of bring it to them, which I think is pretty cool. And a lot of facilities are able to do this now, or send them to other facilities that can provide that, which I think is pretty important. But because there are fish there, we need to have an aquarist who knows lots of things about fish behavior, as well as all of the water quality tests that go along with that. So we're still going to have the same number of tests that we have for the sea turtles, because obviously the sea turtles are still living in that tank, and that's also very important. So we're going to look at the temperature, salinity, pH, and the chlorines. The new tests that we're putting into as well are TAN, which is your total ammonia nitrogen, that later on can become toxic ammonia. Your fish are breathing in the water. And so we want to make sure that they're not breathing in anything toxic, right? We want to try to remove as much of that waste as possible. We're also going to look at nitrites, nitrates, phosphates, calcium, general hardness, and alkalinity. All of these are integral to keeping fish alive. And then lastly, checking for dissolved oxygen at least twice a day for these fish to make sure that they have enough available oxygen that's in the tank from your LSS systems to be able to live. Okay, then next we'll talk about Poppy's tank. It's kind of the problem child. She's not the problem. Okay, so all of these tanks are wonderful. They're a lot deeper than the patient tanks. They're a lot bigger. Some of the patient tanks maybe get up to 5,000 gallons. These are 18,000 to 50,000 gallon tanks, which is quite a lot. But because of the amount of gallon size that there is, you're going to have proper filtration that goes along with that. So at the time when I started, there were only 2 sand filters on this tank, and it needed more. It was very obvious that it needed more just because of the quality and clarity of the water. You can kind of see here in this left-hand photo, you can maybe see about 4 feet behind the turtle. Ideally, we want it to give, the turtle the best, clearest water, not just for, a public standpoint to see them, but also for them to be able to see in the water as well, and to live in a healthy environment. So we added another sand filter onto this tank. And after 3 days of waiting, we were able to stabilize the tank, and it ended up looking like this, which is pretty exciting. And those sand filters are working so hard. Like I said before, they can be mechanical and biological filtrations, and they're working conjunctly together. That way they can do both. They're housing good bacteria for those fish that live in there, and also trying to filter out all of the waste. So anytime that you're filtering, when you're backwashing one of those filters, you may be losing some bacteria. So that's why having other types of filtration to go along with that is very important. So you're not losing both and compromising, do I clean the filter or do I not clean the filter? That kind of thing. Okay, then we'll go into helpful tips and tricks in the trade of maintaining your LSS and water quality. It is not just about maintaining our systems, right? It's also about maintaining and growing connections in our field. I would say that the LSS and water quality field is a very similar size to our sea turtle field. It's very small and everyone knows everyone. And that's amazing. But you have to put yourself out there and be able to actually start making those connections, because you might not have all the answers, right? We want to be able to share and help each other. One of my examples here is having those SOPs and manuals on site. Those are important to have at any moment's notice. If something is going wrong and troubleshooting is not a simple fix, you might need to refer to those and go back through them, or have somebody grab them for you and go through them together. Then another thing that I would say is ask for discounts from manufacturers and stores that you purchase things from regularly. So things are very expensive in the water quality realm, right? All of your reagents are quite expensive. Your pumps are expensive. And so at any point, you could ask one of those manufacturers if you could potentially get some kind of discount. Those conversations can be a little rough. I didn't particularly like them, but it was very simple. Hey, we're a sea turtle hospital. This is what we do. We're buying all these things from you. Is there anything that you can do to help us out? And a lot of times they're like, oh, heck yeah. Even if it's just 5 to 10%, that's still going to save your organization a little bit of money. And I think that's pretty cool. Okay, and then lastly for this slide is finding donors. So yes, we have lots of fundraisers and stuff like that that different organizations will do to help raise funds for our facilities. A lot of times though, we might not have the money to allocate towards LSS or water quality. There might be other important things, and that's great. But if we can, if you take the time to reach out to a company in particular that something you are looking for example, I was in need of a freshwater vat, which is right here. I'm clearly hugging it. I was so happy. I reached out to Tank Depot and asked them if they would consider donating or giving a significant discount towards something like this. This is a 5,000 gallon holding vat. And we really needed it for the residence center in order to reduce salinity levels. And they were very, very excited about it. They actually said that no one had ever asked them for a donation before. And so we were able to partner with them, and maybe, in the future, when you grow that connection, then this was a year-long process as well. So from the start of it and building that connection, we were able to grow with them, and then they were able to donate this tank, and we put out things on social media for them, and now we have a good partnership. And I think that's pretty cool. Okay, another really exciting thing is this conference and organization called ALSO, which is the Aquatic Animal Life Support Operators Conference. It is absolutely amazing. It's been going on for over 20 years now, and it is filled with workshops for about 5 days. Workshops that go through any type of LSS equipment that you could even dream on. It goes through different courses and classes, and then actual hands-on classes, which is literally what you need. You can go with all of your questions and ask the manufacturers themselves, the vendors that are there. You can give them anything and they say, hey, we'll have the answer. Or if we don't have the answer, we'll call up our boss, So that is really exciting. You're also not just getting invaluable knowledge and information from those workshops, but you can also take exams, which are now national exams, and try to pass those. And that's pretty exciting too. And who likes taking tests, right? But it's pretty cool. And then you also get to network with your peers, people that you might not have ever met through anything other than online. And online is great, but there's something really special about connecting with people in person. And my first conference was last year. On the left there, it was a conference that was not supposed to happen. It was from coronavirus, and we were very, very fortunate to go. And I made lifelong friends along the way too. So not just people I can call up with a question, but we're also friends. And I think that that's pretty interesting and cool. And it is so helpful to the facility and for the sea turtles. And that's why I was there, is to help the sea turtles. What can we do for the better care of the equipment that helps keep them going? And then lastly, this is just a little humble plug. So I've had a few interns throughout my career from different facilities, and I have loved them all. So do not think that I do not love you as much, please. But this is one of my favorite things. I do love talking about LSS and water quality and teaching other people. But my last tip is to try to turn one of your interns into an LSS nerd, just like yourself, because we always need it to keep going forward. And I think that happened with Emily here. She had been with us since December. She's still there at the facility now, and she's doing quite amazing things, and I'm very proud of her. Okay, so the last thing we'll talk about is just construction and design process. And this is quite a doozy. So anyone that has ever been through construction or building a new facility, it can be quite a headache. But if you have the right support along the way, it can be a little bit easier, right? So for about a year and a half during my 2 years working at STI, I was able to design the temporary hospital as well as the tank layout, trenching system, and LSS for the new hospital that they'll hopefully be building pretty soon. And that's very exciting. But I do want to say I would never have been able to do it without the support of my boss and mentor, Nina Navi. She was the previous director of animal care at STI and is now the Aquarium Medical Center manager at the New England Aquarium. And then also my partner and consultant, Bailey Lucas, who is an LSS operator at the Monterey Bay Aquarium and was also the previous aquarist for STI a few years ago as well. So I ended up partnering with her to do all of this construction work. So we were able to collaborate because who knows that place better than people that have worked there, right? So we were able to collaborate with our knowledge and our resources and put together what we think would be the best fit for our facility and for the turtles, right? So that was quite amazing. I also reached out to around 15 or so sea turtle hospitals in the United States, zoos and different aquariums that do house sea turtles to kind of gauge like what they liked about their current systems, what's something they kind of wish that they would have been able to change before it got implemented, and what they would change now, and put all those comments into our designs. So I definitely talked to Miss Tina Sharp a lot at Karen Beasley. Thank God for her. We talked about the trenching system they have. And when I saw that at the facility, when I was there, I absolutely loved it. I thought it was so cool. You were able to hide all of the pipes. Unfortunately, people don't always like to see those types of things, but it also protects those pipes. So all of the pipe is actually holding all of the weight of the water that you're pushing through your facility. And it's going back to whatever LSS room that you have. So we were able to use those types of things to help put into the new design for the new hospital. Now, choosing the correct LSS equipment can be a little overwhelming because there are so many things that are out there, and really what works the best and is going to be the right solution is whatever's best for your facility. I know that's not like super easy to have like an answer or not an answer, I guess, but it's whatever is the most comfortable for your people that are going to be ultimately running it. So you don't necessarily need the most top of the top fanciest equipment or the most expensive equipment. That doesn't always mean that it's better either. So whatever equipment that you know that you've used is going to still keep giving you those same results for water quality and LSS. Like that's perfectly fine. Now, designing and implementation can be very intimidating and overwhelming. And I know that for a fact, it's very challenging, especially when you are, still doing a full-time job and other things on the side and having a life. Like it can be. But thankfully, there are also LSS experts and engineers that actually exist, like the company I now work for, and a few others that can aid you in any part of the design process, whether it's implementation or just coming up with ideas. And that's really cool. So for Longhorn Organics, the company I work for now, we are a team of builders, biologists, certified LSS operators, and we even have an in-house veterinarian too. And we all come together as a team to basically build and install all of these LSS systems for zoos, aquariums, aquacultures, and rehab facilities. One of the ones that I just recently visited before we took this job, actually, both my husband and I, was at SeaWorld San Antonio at the Turtle Reef. And this is really cool. So this is another resident sea turtle situation. These guys cannot be released due to different injuries. And the whole LSS was designed to work the way that a natural wetland would filter water, which is really neat. And it's the first of its kind. So essentially, this is just a snapshot of the LSS system. This is just a fraction of what's out there, but this is the top of the exhibit here, if you can see my mouse. And all of the grasses that are here behind here are wetland grasses, and the LSS actually goes up underneath some of the grass, or all of the grass, sorry, and pulls the water from the exhibit through here, and it filters it just like it would naturally in the wild. So that is pretty exciting. There's lots of really neat things that can be done with LSS systems, and it's just a really cool world out there. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it and learned something about LSS systems and water quality. Really love talking about these things if you can't tell. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Maria. Definitely, you can tell that you're very excited about LSS and turning everyone into an obsessed as well. I forgot to tell you in the beginning, actually, because I hadn't seen it. But at Karen Beasley, they actually had said that 8 people were in the room watching you and rooting for you.
That's so sweet. Hi, guys.
I don't currently have yet any questions. I do have a couple, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
When you were talking about those UV sterilizers, do they require like any amount of time for the water to be passing at a certain speed for them to work, or doesn't matter?
Yeah, for sure. There's like a contact time. So a lot of that is controlled by like your flow rate going into it. So whatever the flow rate is, and honestly, there's a lot of calculations behind it, but you can have it going through it for 2 or 3 gallons per minute or something like that to go through it. That way it's actually getting the sterilization that it needs. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. You have Grace saying, great job, Maria. And Casey Stevens as well. So Phil Sharp is saying, hi, Maria, great presentation. Let me just open the question. You mentioned water sources and treatment, but have you experienced restrictions on discharge related to the sewer system limits or and wastewater permits? Thank you.
That's a really good question. And to be honest, I never thought about that question until I was in the midst of construction or the designing process for that. So one of the team members that was helping me from also, they actually brought that up. They were like, are you allowed to dump your backwashed, water into the same area you're pulling it from? And from my knowledge and understanding, we were allowed to. So we don't put any of the backwashed wastewater into like a sewer line at all. And I know that there are restrictions for that and how much you can do, like you were saying. But for the facility that I worked at, we were allowed to do that. And the way that I saw it is that the water was being cleaned when it was pulled in. It's being constantly filtered and cleaned throughout the entire time that it's in the tank. And as soon as it's going out, it's also passing through the filter one last time before it goes back out into the back into the wild. So hopefully whatever is in there from, the turtles, it's also being cleaned and pushed back out. There are other like backwash recovery systems that you can have installed too, that will then clean that water up as well. And then you can reuse that. So then you don't have as much wastewater. So maybe that could be something to look into as well.
Yeah, because that was also going to be my question afterwards, was if your outflow can be in the same area that your inflow is coming from, or if you have to keep them quite apart, or if you do any testings on the water when it's going out. But that makes sense.
Yeah.
Let me just check it out. Then you have a lot of people, you can go on the comment section afterwards just to say that you've done a fantastic presentation, that it was incredibly educational. Carolyn says, I love you and your passion.
So sweet.
Sorry, I said Caroline, but I don't know if it's Caroline.
It's Caroline.
Sorry. Let me just see. So Charmaine Joy, she says, hi, Maria. Wonderful presentation. In your experience, are chlorinators common on rehab exhibits in addition to ozone, or instead of is ozone seen on its own?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I was just talking to my husband about that before the presentation. I think that they have to be separated. I don't think I've ever seen it together, but I mean, that's just from my experience. So at least at Sea Turtle Inc., we only had chlorinators on the tank, not ozone, at least while I was there. So I really don't know, but I would say that they need to be separated. I'm not really sure though.
That's good. And Emily says, so amazing, Maria. Thank you for being such an awesome mentor.
You guys are gonna make me cry.
No, it's been really nice. Let me just see if I didn't miss anyone. Because as I'm asking you, then it keeps popping up, so it just makes it harder to show up. Let me just check. Yeah, the minute. Your mom is also saying that she's really proud of you.
Oh, guys.
She's cute. Yeah, at the minute there's no more questions, just a lot of compliments. It was indeed a really great presentation. Thank you so much. I do think that having those standard operating protocols definitely it's a really great step forward, because it's, as you said, we go to very different rescue centers, all of them work differently, and there's always somebody that knows what they're doing. But if that person's missing by some reason, then you're always like, oh, what do I do now?
Yeah, exactly. And if they're not able to be reached, like, or they're on vacation, the last thing you want to do is call them. So that is something so important to have. And I know that some facilities are working on them too, even just for the medical care side, which I think is great.
Yeah, that's going to be the next step on my other visits on rescue centers. Do
you
have the SOPs?
I love it.
So guys, if you do have any more questions, you can always pop them in the comment section. Me and Maria will be both checking in and just seeing who needs answering to. Otherwise, you can also email us. I just marked it on the comment section, the stri@citralrescuealliance.org email, and I'll be sure to forward it to Maria. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Maria. It was
Absolutely
lovely talking to you and having you on board. And thank you everyone that joined.
Thanks so much. I really appreciated doing this. This was really fun.
Yeah, it was great. Well, thank you guys for joining in. Next month we'll have another one. We'll be posting about it soon enough. So just keep an eye on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Maria.
Bye.